everybody. Recording live from somewhere. This is Zach Couples with episode number 22 of the Movement Debrief. And we got a doozy for you today, ladies and germs. We're going to talk about all types of ill shit. What? I'm glad you asked. We got scoliosis on docket. We got Morton's Neuroma on docket. And we got just-in-time learning on docket. And you know what else we got on docket? Whatever the hell else you guys want to ask me. So throughout this debrief, please fire away some questions. I'll answer them to the best of my capabilities. And if I miss you for some odd reason, I'll answer it on the next debrief. But before we get into that, a little bit of housekeeping. Did you guys see my blog this past week? So I got to review the Resilient Movement Foundations course because I got to attend that a few weeks ago by my boys out of Resilient Physical Therapy and Performance. So Douglas Kachijan, my beautiful baby boy Trevor Rappa, and my lovely stepson Greg Spatz. They put on a really good course. I got a lot out of it, and I think you can always benefit from reviewing the basics. And I have yet to find a class that does the basics as savagely well as those people out of Resilience. So check out their courses. Check them out, period. And check out their the blog. Check out all that stuff, man. They got good things going. So we got that. Next week, I'm pretty darn excited because I'm going to the land of China to give 3 talks. I know I've said 2 in the past, but I got a third one sprung on me, so hey, why in the hell not, right? So I got 3 talks. I'm hoping to put 2 of them out on the interwebs at some point, so stay tuned for that. That also means there probably won't be a debrief next week, but I'll take care of you guys on Wednesday. Don't worry, I'll figure something out. So just a heads up on that. Another thing to heads up, housekeeping-wise, I got the dates mixed up, but I am going to be teaching a 2-day seminar next September in Seattle, Washington. I think that's how they pronounce it. And it's going to be actually the 15th and the 16th. So you guys should check that out. My boy, Michael Lee, is going to be hosting me. And we're going to talk about all types of cool things. And you probably should be there, even if it is horribly inconvenient for you to fly to Seattle. Because we'll have fun. And I'll tell you what, where in China, Lee? That's a good question. So in China, I'm going to be speaking at 2 separate conferences. One in Shaanxi, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and the other is going to be in Changzhou. And I'll be hanging in Beijing, or not Beijing, but Shanghai for a little bit. So I'm pretty excited. I've never been to China. I've actually never left the continent of North America. So it's going to be interesting. I'm really kind of excited. So I look forward to being there. And Lee, yes, it is sports medicine / PT related. The 3 talks that I am going to be discussing will be one on breathing, one on pain, and one on just musculoskeletal rehab. So, yeah, those are the talks. If you're in either of those areas, you should go to the conference, and we'll hang out, get some food or something. The same is true for Seattle. We will party till the cows come home if you come to the Seattle class. So yes, thank you, Lily. Appreciate you. Anyways, let's debrief, shall we? First question. I got this from Carmel on YouTube. And please ask questions, people. I got this from Carmel on YouTube, and she asked, "Hey, Zach, could you do a video on scoliosis?" Sure, why not? How do you treat scoliosis? Let me preface this. I've treated a lot of people with scoliosis, but I wouldn't necessarily say that was the reason why they came for me. Actually, I got a guy right now who's got pretty sizable scoliosis who I'm treating for back pain. But I haven't seen much of it. So a lot of the concepts that I will be discussing will be people who've seen a lot more scoliosis than I, and that's the people at the Postural Restoration Institute. They got really good stuff on scoliosis, and I'll put in the show notes that you can read tomorrow on the blog, zachcouples.com. What? about one of the courses that I took where they discussed scoliosis, which is their Advanced Integration class. So definitely, it was a good class, so I would check that out. But the way I think of scoliosis is this. First off and foremost, we all have to understand that we all have scoliosis, each and every one of us. It's actually a normal part of being a human being, because we got these asymmetries built into us caused by this thing right here called a heart and this thing right here called a liver. And that influences, and this is research, I'm not making this crap up, this was in Spine in, I believe, 06 and 07. I think there's a few other places that this was mentioned too. But in those studies, they showed that all of us have a right rotation to our spine. We all have a little bit of a right side bend to our spine, and we all have a left counter rotation in the thoracic spine. So realize that scoliosis is normal to some degree. Now, obviously, normal can run rampant, right? And you see people with these grossly exaggerated curves that could potentially do some nasty things to some of the vital organs if left unchecked, among other things, or just potentially be a contributing factor to pain. So, what do you do for that? The way I think about scoliosis is I think of the spine and the exaggerated curves as a compensatory mechanism for something that person can't do. So let's unpack that a little bit. So the common scoliosis curve that a lot of us might see is a right side bend, right rotation curve of the spine. And so why are they doing that? Or what can't they do to do that? Well, it may be the case that they can't reverse that and do this. Well, why can't they do that? One potential limiting factor, because we have muscle tone obviously as a potential limiter of movement variability, right? Because that's going to be key with these people. We have to restore variability so the spine can move in all three planes. So we could have muscle tone limiting or putting them in that position. We can also have airflow putting them in that position. So if you imagine that I have this huge beach ball right here on my left-hand side, and I try to go in side bend. Well, because that beach ball is there, I can't do it because air is in the way of preventing me from moving that way. And a lot of times in these people, you will see hyperinflation unilaterally, predominantly on the left side if it's a right scoliosis. And so how do I know that they're hyperinflated? Well, a lot of times you will see the ribs either pop up like so, which is rib external rotation. And when that occurs, that shows us that the left hemidiaphragm has descended, right? Because as the diaphragm descends, it's normal for us to get some lateral expansion of the lower rib cage. And so I might get that on one side, okay? And that means that that lung is a bit more filled. So what do you have to do to treat that? Well, I have to get the air out on that side, and because I'm so scrunched down on this side, I have to expand the opposite side so I can create space to get to my left. That can potentially open up some of the intercostals. That can alter the position that the spine is in. That can also get muscle tone to reduce on some of those structures. And so you bet, Coach Zachary, 90-90 is a potentially good activity for that, and the rib cage is big on that. Now, with some of these people, I might gravitate towards some type of thing where I'm getting some type of intercostal expansion or expansion of the apical lung on the right-hand side, so you can think about some overhead type activities reaching up this way, any type of forward reach potentially if they're a little bit more narrow on that right side. Basically anything that can get me to close down the left ribs, achieve a zone of apposition, which is the amount of diaphragm tissue that lies right next to the rib cage. Right? I need to achieve that somehow so I can expand the right side, and that can potentially influence the curve of the spine. Now, obviously, there's some curves and some adaptations that can happen where you're not going to get much change, but maybe what you're doing in that case is you're mitigating further increase in the curve, or you are slowing down the process. And so that's one thing that you could potentially do for that, just from a movement standpoint. I'm not as well versed in bracing for scoliosis, so I can't really talk much about that. And I haven't really played with any bracing with anyone that I can think of. So I'm sure that that would potentially help as well, because you're placing them in the positions that they need to be successful. But that would just be me waxing poetic. Another possible curve that you might see. What about loading patterns? Coach Zachary, if you could talk to me a little bit, or get a little bit more in depth with your question, I could probably answer that, but I'm not sure what you mean by that. Another potential curve is you'll see sometimes a leftward scoliosis. So instead of the right side bend, right rotation, they might be incredibly twisted to the left side. So what's going on there, right? Because, maybe I got to go down on this side and fill out that. And that's not necessarily the case. With those individuals, why is the spine going to the left? My thought is that, maybe it's possible that they can't get onto that left side as effectively as they could for whatever reason. And so one thing you'll want to check with those people is, can they shift over to their left side into their left hip? And so you'll want to check left hip range of motion, because a lot of times you may see limitations in adduction, you may see limitations in internal rotation at the hip, which is required to fully load the left hip and achieve true left stance in three planes. And what may be happening, theoretically, obviously we can't really necessarily prove this, but what may be happening is, because they can't do that, the lumbar spine is trying to compensate by rotating and side bending to the left. And so you can do activities where you're shifting back into the hip, working on left stance, reaching over with your right arm so you could get into left stance. All these types of things are potential avenues that you could treat someone. So those would be kind of the approaches that I would look at for treating scoliosis. But basically, it's find whatever it is that they can't do, that maybe the spine is trying to get them to do, and help them be able to do that. And if you can do that, you might be in business, and you might do some favorable things for their curve. So, great question, Carmel. I hope I pronounced your name right. And we'll move on. Next question is regarding Morton's neuroma. This is Brian from the interwebs. I think he emailed me this. Hey, Zach, how would you go about treating Morton's neuroma? I haven't seen many people with Morton's neuroma, but let's talk about Morton's neuroma. So what is that? So neuroma is basically a benign tumor in one of the nerves, typically between the second and third, or third and fourth intertarsal nerve, which is an extension of the plantar nerves. And so sometimes a neuroma can develop in those areas, and it could potentially be related to someone experiencing pain in that area when they take a step. A lot of times this may be associated or aggravated by tight shoes. So treatment number one is see if shoe wear is a potential aggravator, and address that. You may also see that bearing different types of foot positions that a person may be in. And so how would I go about treating one of these people? And really, it's the same thought process as I would for any condition. And so the first thing is, can I rule out the big bad stuff, and is this person appropriate for my clinic and for me to see them? And so what does that entail? Well, what could potentially be bad that's not Morton's neuroma in this case, right? So you could potentially have a stress fracture in the area. You could potentially have neural compromise. So, is there some type of neurological weakness, decreases in reflexes, all these things? is there any swelling or anything like that in the area? Is there basically anything that warrants a referral to someone else? So check that first. Second off, go for the low-hanging fruits. And so shoe wear might be one piece. So if they got really tight shoes, see if you can offload that structure essentially by giving them less tight shoes or having them switch to less tight shoes. That's another possibility. But then the treatment hierarchy stays the same. You address movement variability first and foremost. So can they move in all three planes actively and passively? And that's going to be idiosyncratic to the individuals. It's really hard to say what I would specifically do. But whatever it is I would restore that to the best of my capabilities. Now, before I go on to the next step, which would potentially be neurodynamics, one thing you want to consider is the position that the feet are in. And so what you may see, and we'll say I have a left neuroma. You got to look at a few things. So what position is the heel in? Are they more supinated or inverted, or are they more everted? Because those require two different treatments, and those could potentially put pressure over where that neuroma is. Because remember, nerves like three things. They like movement, they like space, and they like blood flow. Now, if you're addressing movement variability, you're going to improve all of those areas because you've restored range of motion at all the joints. That could potentially reduce space around the nerve along its entire continuum. But we also have to consider what position the foot is in, because that could potentially reduce space locally. And so if I'm falling inward this way, if I everted and have a pronated foot, I may have constant pressure and tension in the area, and that could be problematic, and you may have to restore the arch somehow. And so what I have to be able to get that person to do is, instead of being here, I need them to be here. So with some activities, when they're on the affected foot, I may cue them to put some of their weight on their outside heel so they can restore some semblance of an arch. Another thing you could do, assuming they have pretty good shoe wear, that's got a fairly stable heel counter and is a little bit flexible in the forefoot and has a decent, not bendable arch like mine does. You can play a little bit with some, I won't say orthotics because I'm going to them less often, but you could play with just modifying the position of the heel and the arch with, say, a medial wedge. So I may put a little wedge, and I don't have them here with me, but you can put a wedge in the shoe, and that pushes them there and give them that awareness to be a little bit more centered at the heel. And potentially, if their foot's really, really flat because they're in this pronated position all the time, you could potentially put an arch pad there. You just have to be careful that it's not decreasing the space too much around where the neuroma is located. Now, another thing you might see is someone who is more supinated or is an inverted calcaneus. And that may be putting pressure on the nerve for a different reason, right? Maybe because the intrinsics are a bit more active and they can't collapse the arch. That muscle tension or some structural abnormalities in that area could be reducing space around the nerve locally. So what do you do for that person? You get them to pronate. How do I do that? I work on activities where they're finding and feeling their arch, and then they're kicking in their glute on the ipsilateral side. Think like kind of PNF, D1 extension kind of things. Because those two movements go oftentimes hand in hand, right? A lot of times, if you look at some of like the chronic ankle or the ankle instability or ankle sprain research, where someone goes into this position and they sprain their ankle, you get a reduction in muscle activity of the gluteus medius. And so it seems as though there is some relation by getting someone out of this position, which I believe they did in the study. I'll have to see if I can find that and put it in the show notes. But if you can get someone to do this, you can use a glute to help you create that pronation and eversion movement. So there is that, right? And if I want to make tweaks in the shoes to be able to effectively do that, well, if they're here and I need them to be able to feel their arch and do that with their heel. I can just put an arch pad right here and put a lateral wedge in their shoe, and that will push them into that arch so they can get that eversion thing and help the arch of the shoe or of the foot drop down. So those would be potential things you could consider as well that could potentially favorably impact the neuroma. Once you've done those things, you've restored variability, next thing I would check, neurodynamics. And so we know that the nerves involved in Morton's neuroma are an extension of the plantar nerves, which are an extension of the tibial nerve, sciatic nerve, all that jazz. And so what's the neurodynamic test? Well, you would do dorsiflexion and eversion of the foot, do a straight leg raise or a slump, see if that reproduces some symptoms. And you can elicit it even further by pulling on the toes, because that will excurse the posterior or the nerves on the bottom of the foot a little bit more. So that would be another thing I would check. And don't stop there. If there's a movement that's still offending after you've restored variability and all that, alter trunk position. So have them flex, chin to chest, and see if that same movement's bothersome, because it may be a loading problem within neurodynamics that could potentially be leading to a pain experience, or contributing at least. So those would be other things that I would potentially look at. Then after that, it's just getting them to tolerate loading patterns and whatever it is that's problematic for them, and then building capacity. If they're a runner and maybe their foot doesn't hurt until mile 3, well, we got to do things to help build endurance of keeping good mechanics and body position throughout the entirety of the run. And so maybe you use some type of modality to improve upon that. And it's not necessarily that they need to get better cardiovascular endurance, but their tissues need to be able to tolerate running for X amount of period of time. And so that's how I would go about treating a Morton's neuroma. It's the same process, always. It's, are they appropriate for me? Get them variability, get them power, get them capacity, get them out. That's it. So there's Morton's neuroma. Sorry, I thought there was a question. Okay. The last question comes from my man, the myth, the legend himself, Dave Rascoe. You guys should check him out at Method Strength. He's the man. He's a really good trainer just outside of Austin, Texas, and also he's got some shit with some funk med stuff too, which really excites me about him. So go ahead and check him out, and I'll link him in the show notes as well. But Dave asks, "Hey Zach, could you talk about just-in-time learning?" Dave, I most certainly can talk about just-in-time learning. And so I came across this concept both from my good buddy Eric Otter and from the Tim Ferriss book, 4-Hour Work Week, which you guys should read. It's really good. I like it. I like his stuff. Say what you will about him. And this concept of just-in-time learning is applied to basically how are you designing or planning your studying process. So I think a lot of us, and I've been guilty of this myself in the past, see one person reading this book and this book and this book, and then I have to go and read those things. I remember back in the day that everyone was reading the polyvagal theory, and I sure as hell needed to read the polyvagal theory because that's what everyone was reading, and I needed to keep up with the Joneses. And so I read the polyvagal theory, and I was like, cool. Now what? Because it didn't really change anything that I did, and I couldn't really apply it at the time. So that would be an example of just-in-case learning, right? Where I'm just reading because I might need this at some point. Or maybe I'm going into, reading some esoteric material that I don't work with anyone with that, but I need to know it just in case something happens. So it's reading with purpose, but it's not a purpose that's pertinent to you now. That would be just-in-case learning. What I advocate for now, and what I try to structure my learning on with, is just-in-time learning. And so what that is you want to ask yourself this question: what problem am I trying to solve? Or is there a problem that I'm currently dealing with right now that I'm struggling and I need to spend more time learning? So once you have that question in mind, then you amalgamate your resources to answering that question. And so you buy books to help you answer that question. You read research articles to help you answer that question. You do all of these things to help you answer that question. You go with podcasts just to answer that question. And so let me give you a hypothetical example. In preparing for my talk on breathing, we'll say that I'm giving in the land of China, I pretty much stopped reading most outside things because I needed to get this done. And so what did I do? Well, I went through some of my books that I have that are involved in breathing. And so, I went through my anatomy stuff. I went through some of the posture restoration material. I went through neural control of the respiratory muscles. I looked at all of these things just to get some ideas and feelers in terms of what I need to know about these things. I then researched the hell out of breathing, and I probably read 20, 25, somewhere, a lot of it. Too many articles, man, too many. Because I needed to know everything I could to help answer this question, right? How can we effectively train respiration to help our people? And is it effective for that matter? Podcasts, I didn't really go much to a podcast route in this regard, but another thing I did was I looked to my mentor, Daddy-O Pops Bill Hartman, and I asked him some questions because I needed clarification on some things that I came across in the research. And that was incredibly helpful. And then the last thing was applying all of this information that I attained to my patients. Because it's really that application. It's applying it to the patients. It's designing this talk where the learning really sticks in. Because if you don't use it, you're going to lose it. That's why just in case fails. You have just-in-time learning because that's a way you can reinforce it continually while you're learning the material. And then, guess what? If you fail while you're learning the new material in your application process, it forces you to go back and maybe relearn some concepts or try some new things. And that might take you to other avenues that can enhance the learning process even further. And so that's why I am a huge fan of just-in-time learning. Because when you can apply it, you can learn it much more effectively. And unless any of you beautiful, sexy people have some questions, I think that'll be a good stopping point for tonight. If you guys do have questions for the debrief in the future, there's a few spots you can hit me up to ask them. Where? I'm glad you asked. So first off, go to zachcouples.com. And a few things I want you to do. First up, subscribe to my newsletter, because you'll get a bunch of free stuff. And guess what? Those talks that I am doing in China, they're going to be exclusive to my members of my newsletter. And so if you want those, if you have an incessant desire to hear me blabber on for multiple hours, you probably should sign up for the newsletter because you'll get it that way. You can also email me directly that way once you're in the newsletter. So that's one way you can get a hold of me. Also, while you're there, if you have a movement limitation that you need help with, if you have mentoring that you need help with, some of these PT, strength conditioning, sleep, nutrition, all that crap, or if you want online training from this joker right here, you can go ahead and check that out by clicking on the services page. Because you'll get all types of cool things by working directly with me, and we can tailor things to the things that you need. So there's that. Go to zachcouples.com. Check it out. It's a dope site, but I'm a little bit biased. Other places you can find me, facebook.com/zcouples. Just hashtag movement debrief when you ask your question. I also just started a page, Zach Couples, so you can like that as well. I'm going to be eventually switching more to that, so you may want to go check that out. You can also hit me up on Twitter. My handle is @ZCouples. Go ahead and check that out. Hashtag Movement Debrief if you want to ask me a question. I've been trying to be a little bit more active on Twitter. I've been trying to do a little reflection each day to see if I can share with you beautiful people. So you may want to hit me up on Twitter. You can also follow me on that Instagram, baby. Instagram.com. My handle is Zach, Z-A-C, Couples, C-U-P-P-L-E-S. Just comment on the pictures I have and ask questions that way. Hell, just get a hold of me somehow. I want you here on all these spots because I'm offering a little bit different things on each one. Last thing, you can go to YouTube. YouTube.com/couplesperformance, I think, is my site on that regard. But a lot of times I'll put out videos that I don't put anywhere else. You should probably check me out on YouTube. That's all I got for tonight, people. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys have been wonderful. I want you to stay classy, keep it real to the extent that things don't go wrong. Keep it real to the extent where things don't go wrong. Yes, do that. Stay hungry, stay learning, stay moving, and I'll see you guys next time. Deuces. Jason Byrne, you're the man, you're the myth, and you are the legend, my friend. And I'm loving what you're doing on Instagram, so keep it up. Deuces.